This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Man, I cannot believe it is almost September, which means that the NBA tip-off will happen in less than 2 months. And the irony of it all is, when this does happen, we are going to be seeing the NBA in a completely new light with a little bit of the old sprinkled in, right? Like, I'm sure everybody is going to be excited about the new rollout taking place with the partnerships that the NBA has going on with Peacock, NBC. Amazon. It's Amazon. It's going to be crazy. But let's not forget, they're doing a little retro, right? Like bringing back the NBA on NBC. And if y'all grew up during our era, or you know what I'm saying, you got folks, you know what I'm saying, your dad, your uncles, your grandpappy having those conversations about what they don't like when they see the NBA on ABC. Wow. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? They're going to start bringing when I was watching it on NBC, it was, you know what I'm saying, and they had that, and then if you had the little craziness going on with our man Kevin Hart, like, you would know what we're talking about. So we're going to get a little bit of that, but you're going to also get a little bit of innovation as well, too. So it's going to be all exciting, right? Like, we get geeked up whenever the NBA challenges itself and pushes itself into a different direction with the way that it rolls out our consumption of the game of basketball. And so we're just getting you prepped up for it, like by having these great conversations. Rolling out the red carpet to my right-hand man, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC. My man, Mr. Warren Shaw. What's good, Mr. Brother? My brother. What's going on, man? Are we getting amped up for the coming of the season?
Well, I see with the shoulder bounce there too, brother. Yeah, we absolutely are getting amped up. I was looking at my calendar and said, damn, media days at the end of the month. I got to figure out kind of like what that situation is going to be. Will I be able to cover this year? Should I try to go to see another team? I actually want to kind of maybe go see the Magic instead of the Heat this year. So we'll see. Stay tuned for that. But yeah, man, it's an exciting time. And as you alluded to, I'm watching all the social media feeds, seeing all of the new partners, as you alluded to, gearing up for all these great analysts and reporters that are now joining forces. Cannot wait to see what MJ has to talk about, you know, on Peacock and NBA on NBA ABC, like what that is going to bring, you know, we have like those viral bites like we have with Stephen A and Kendrick Perkins. Like, I don't know, it's going to be a really, really interesting year that I'm excited for. But we are still here, man. You know what? This year, 13, 14, I'm losing count, brother. We're going back into this joint, and we have a great show lined up for folks going into the NBA season ahead.
Absolutely. You know, you brought up a really interesting point, because it is, you know, obviously been confirmed that Michael Jordan will be an on-air commentator or on-air analyst. And this is why I love sports, right? Like, I really think sometimes we get consumed in compartmentalizing at times. Pro athletes just being pro athletes. Like, they don't know how to or can transition into different roles that could actually be productive for how we want to consume the game, see the game, you know, understand the game and the nuances of it. I genuinely believe at times there's this kind of force feed mentality that if an athlete gets into the media space, that they have to operate as like a journalist would, or as, you know, as an analyst would, or whatever the case may be. And I just think, like, sometimes we got to let them grow into what it is that they should become, and just understand that they are now going to be a part of that ecosystem, and it is a necessary need for them to be in that ecosystem. And I use this as an example, right? You look at Derek Jeter, right? Derek Jeter is somebody where he always managed to show you what he was and how he was. It wasn't always dictated by what he was saying in front of the cameras. He said what was needed because that was what was asked of him. But you really didn't get a better understanding of how he is as a person when he can invest the time and the effort into giving you what it is that he wants people to understand about the game of baseball. And you can see how he is flourishing as a commentator with the Fox panel that covers Major League Baseball. And I find that to be refreshing, because I don't want Derek Jeter to eventually become someone that I got to see him on like for a sake. If he wants to do that, that's fine. But I know that if he approaches it, he's going to do it in a way where it is a transition of him treating it with the same professionalism that he treats how he prepared himself to be a Major League Baseball player, like he prepared himself to be an executive. And I just want to make sure that like what people have is their expectations of Michael Jordan coming into that space, that it's not about him being as the owner. And it's not just about him as just being the basketball player. It's a combination of all of those things. It's about understanding his experiences and then finding a way to bring that so that it's not something where it's just clickbait, but it's really a true nuanced understanding of someone who chose to put himself in these specific spaces, good or bad, so that this way we all can appreciate why he is as great as he was, or what it is that he can truly bring to the table rather than just being a name and a face that's being added onto the list of what the NBA is going to look like with this new rollout.
There's a lot to unpack in that statement, and it's almost kind of another show in that of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hoping that we have that conversation before the season starts to do that. But I'm trying to be much more open-minded about these things, because I think we get too quick to be like, oh, if he doesn't come off or he doesn't sound like what we're so used to sounding like when we're having these new spaces, we kill the momentum before it even has time to flourish.
I would imagine that the society that we're in right now is going to be looking to tear him down at every possible turn. That's just what I expect, because obviously he's from the elder generation, so to speak, at this time. And he may come off with some takes that some people are going to say, oh, it's a kind of get off my lawn type of situation. And there will be some who will be like, hey, well, he knows what he's talking about. He's arguably the greatest player ever, so to speak. I think there's going to be a lot of discourse in that. And I think NBC knows exactly what they're doing and bringing him on to kind of play within that role. I just don't think he will by nature be looking to try to be clickbaity himself. I think he's going to be very honest in what his opinions are, but it will become clickbaity by nature of how we consume NBA and obviously any type of social media content, especially when it comes from our luminaries like MJ. So that is something that will be very, very nuanced, but probably at some point even get on some of our nerves because, like, listen, he was just giving his opinion. He wasn't trying to go viral, but that's the space that we're in right now. And I think NBA and NBC will figure out a way to make that play to their advantages with plenty of streams, plenty of views, and plenty of content. What I'm looking forward to, and last thing I'll say about it is, will we get coverage now that is not just kind of LeBron and the Lakers, right? Will NBA and NBC actually get to debate the LeBron MJ?
Can there be balance?
Right? Like,
can there be balance?
Yeah. Can we just get away from the kind of the same narratives over and over and over again? Lakers, Warriors, whatever it is. Like, I want to hear some new stuff. And that's what I hope Amazon and Peacock and others will be hopefully bringing to the table here.
And to your point, Sean, I'm going to say this because obviously we have our show that we got to do. But to your point, what I'm also hoping for is for all of these on-air personalities that are being brought on, I am hoping that they are coming in with a mentality that this is an opportunity for me to help do that. Like, if it's one thing that you get on your own podcast, you get on your own medium platforms, and you have the freedom to kind of do this as you choose. But then obviously, because you weigh into, is it whether or not click worthy? Is it getting me my streams? Is it getting my things? You become very, you hedge your bet, so to speak. This is an opportunity. NBA is going to make money, but the only way that the NBA continues to make that money is you've got to make sure that you're bringing people into the fold. And to do that, you have to understand that it's not just about only the major markets. Maybe some of those executives and producers can feel that kind of way because that's their safe space. But if you believe in your own community, and the NBA is a global community, then you have to believe that you cannot just be parsed in your own partiality and perception of that. You've got to make sure that you take that same accountability, that same responsibility, kind of like what we do. It's great if we can always and only talk about what the major markets are doing in basketball. But we also understand that if it's not for like the Detroit Pistons and the Memphis Grizzlies and the Charlotte Hornets of the world, and even to some degree, the Portland Trailblazers, right? If it's not us doing that, then who does it? And who continues to bring relevancy when those teams are on its uptick and when they're on their downtick. And I want to make sure that those on-air personalities keep that in mind as well, too. I get it. You're going to get the bag because they're paying you to be of a certain kind of way. But that doesn't mean that in the greater scheme of things, your bag comes from the NBA holistically, and it's thriving to continue to build up its audiences. And that responsibility comes when you continue to introduce people and keep people in the know about those other teams, because they still make up that percentage of what the major markets don't make up.
I mean, some of the answers matter to be there. I haven't studied the scheduled release, which did come out, while we were kind of in our hiatus here. But what are all those new outlets? What games are they broadcasting? Even with an 11 p.m. start now, I think it's on Amazon, or like what games are that, right? And is it always the same, 6 to 8 teams that we know all the time, or are your mid-market and even kind of smaller teams getting coverage on all these platforms, with the NBA literally having 7 days of coverage on their major network, so to speak? Yes, they'll still have League Pass, but when it comes to, ESPN, NBC, and Amazon, ABC, I guess, is part of the whole, ESPN package as well, too. What teams are being covered throughout that? And that's the conversation, and do they shift? Do they pivot? Like your things like, hey, this is no longer a great story. Like, we shouldn't have covered this team anymore, not show them. But will they go to a team that suddenly now becomes hot, right? Will we see, I'm sure we'll see a lot of Houston, but will we see the Detroits, of the world, and will the reigning champs get their appropriate due? So all that is to be discovered and to be determined here as in the weeks and months ahead of the NBA season. But we digress. We have a much different show in line, but maybe we'll circle back to this before the season starts.
Absolutely. Callie, Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast. As always, be sure to get him on my man at the Warren Shaw. You can get at me at Game Face Lee, the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline, available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. You can also go to www.thebaselinenba.com to not only check this episode, but also the plethora of episodes that we've been delivering for your listening pleasures for oh so long. Also, if you catch us on the YouTube channel, we'd like to say hello to you and yours. And when you see the blue and white logo flashing out there, just know that is the 19 Media Group family. 19 Media Group, you're running these content streets. Be sure to go to www.19mediagroup.com to not only check us, but check out the family of great content creators. 19 Media Group be running these content streets, man. So whatever your listening pleasure is, just know that 19 Media Group has got what you need. All right, Shaw. This week, we're going to highlight a little bit of the conversation that I think now has a little bit of room to breathe, right? Like, I think everybody has been very much baked into the idea of saying Nikola Jokic, best player in the game of basketball, right now, arguably, right? 3 MVPs in 4 years. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, he's now an MVP, right? But what's going to happen over the next 3 to 5 years? What are we going to actually be saying? Is it going to be the world of SGA and the Jokic, the combination or rivalry, so to speak, of capturing MVPs? Or is there now really an opportunity, a space, not to hit the reset button, but for us to kind of like move the goalposts a little bit more forward now, right? Like, our eyes definitely on others to probably step in over the next few years and upset the apple cart of the perception of what MVP should look like and who should ultimately be hoisting the trophy. So Shaw and I are going to dig in on, basically the pundit favorites that have been talked about, that are being discussed as potential favorites. We'll look at some strong contenders, and then we'll also dig into a few dark horses, people who, probably might be flying under the radar, but I think we should be watching very, very closely as to whether or not they should be in the MVP conversations over the next few years. So great show on tap. And I would just say for you and yours, keep an open mind. You know what I'm saying? Let your mind blossom to the possibilities of having an open race for someone to hoist the MVP trophy, because that's how it should be. Callie, Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA. Even Alexa doesn't even have an answer for that, but we'll give you an answer for that. Baseline NBA, don't go anywhere. We are back. Callie, Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast. And topic for this week, MVP candidates over the next 3 to 5 years. We just had the awakening of SGA. But I even think, Shaw, and we've talked about this a few times. While this was definitely the year of the Oklahoma City Thunder, and no one can question the effectiveness and the efficiency and the way that SG went about his business of taking that MVP trophy, right? I think, and I'm sure you may feel the same way about this, he didn't run away with it the same way that we saw Jokic run away with MVP legitimacy, for the last 4 years, right? Like, there could even be an argument to say that Jokic made a late run to kind of put some pressure on SGA. But ultimately, winning the MVP isn't just you have a pretty good first half and then you have this great on a heater, and then you got one guy who literally from the beginning to the end not just was a model of consistency, but was a model of dominance and helped usher his team to ultimately being the best team in the NBA, not just by winning the trophy, but at the end of the regular season, SGA was more so definitely deserving of it. But in the end, you never walked away with that sense of, oh my God, he completely blew everything so far out of the waters to the point where you're like, the next 3 to 5 years is his and his alone. I think that we can kind of make the argument that there will be a couple of people who are on the precipice, probably even knocking on the door like my man Baby does, when he with Dreamville. You'd be knocking on that door and saying, hey, I got dibs on this conversation about being MVP, and he doesn't have to be Jokic or Giannis Antetokounmpo.
The funny thing about the MVP conversation is we always know it's so narrative driven, and we get voter fatigue and the whole nine. So like even the odds for this upcoming season, it's SGA and Jokic kind of at the top. Jokic is leading in most odds things that I've seen, and where SGA is kind of right there. So the opportunity to kind of repeat is there. But the purpose of our conversation is right? Who is a guy who can capture their first MVP within the next 3 to 5 years, right? Who are the most likely folks that are going to have the talent, the narrative, which is also very important, and then also the types of seasons, team success that we think are kind of like the magical elixir that makes up what we love when it comes to MVP conversations. SGA and Giannis and Jokic have been, the kind of like the names we've been seeing for a very, very long time, kind of at the tops of these conversations. And as you alluded to, SGA had a miraculous season, but didn't run away because Jokic, despite multiple MVPs previous to this, had his best season statistically, of his career last year. So there was just so much, consternation around, all right, well, is it now SGA's time finally? And what OKC just kind of.
I'm sorry, Shaw, I just wanted to correct myself. 3 and 5 years, because I forgot Embiid took MVP in between that iteration of that time frame. So 3 and 5 years for Jokic.
But we know at the end of the day, like all these guys, like they have multiple or one at least under their belt. So part of the conversation that we can have towards the end with the names that we're going to mention is, are we more likely to see somebody win their second, third, or fourth in certain cases before some of these guys win their first? And that's a conversation maybe towards the end of the show. But for purposes of what we wanted to do right now, I think we've kind of divided this into like, who are the guys who are most likely to win an MVP within the next 3 to 5 years? And I'm going to submit to you my top two. We had some conversation off air about who the third person may be, but I would be highly surprised if Luka Doncic or Victor Wembanyama do not win an MVP within the next 3 to 5 years. And all the things are there for both of them. So I'm going to kind of group them together in this pairing because they have narrative, they have star appeal, and their teams are built for success. You can debate the level of success for both of those teams and how much they'll have, especially in the next X amount of seasons. But these are both guys who have all the talent in the world and are striding in a way, especially with Wemby, really probably going to be the defensive player of the year multiple times in a row as well, too, coming up here, in addition to just the role the talent he has. And then the Laker narrative that surrounds Luka going into this and what it's going to look like a comeback season. He's skinny Luka now, and everyone doubted him, and Dallas, got rid of him before they could really make a play for him in the long term to literally be the future face of their franchise. I think these two guys have the biggest and strongest case to be MVPs in the next 3 to 5 seasons.
I can't disagree with you one bit with this perspective, Shaw. And I know you like to use numbers, but I'm going to use perspective a little bit and just kind of give people an understanding of why I think it's easy to select these as the top go-getters of getting an MVP within the next 3 to 5 years. let's just use Luka Doncic, for example, in this iteration, right? One of the conversations that we had a couple of weeks ago regarding Luka Doncic was, was it necessary for us to see skinny Luka, right? Was it necessary for him to lose all that weight and be this version of himself? And what's that going to actually translate to, this year and moving forward, if this is actually the quote unquote standard, right, for him? And one of the things that I took from this, because I was very cautious in that, and I'm sure you were as well too, can him being in that weight at that stature be sustainable to play at an MVP level, which is what's going to be necessary if the Los Angeles Lakers are going to be in the conversation among one of the best teams in the NBA, not even come next year, but just in general, right? If that is the case, then what we will have said to ourselves is Luka can transform, can morph himself into whatever is needed for him to be at the highest level necessary to give whichever team that he's on the best possible chance to win an NBA championship. And that's something that I think doesn't often get discussed. It gets kind of, baked into some of these little conversations when you want to use numbers and things. But what I'm looking at is when a person is willing to transform himself in less than a season, and let's go back and look at Jason Tatum. Let's go back and look at Jalen Brown. Let's go back and look at other players who ultimately had to change the way, not just their physique, but also maybe their conditioning, maybe their style of basketball, maybe the way that they go about handling their business, the way that they become leaders to teams. We don't often talk about it because sometimes it's like that in an instant. But to see Luka do something like that, given the circumstances of what happened to him last year from the Dallas Mavericks to the Los Angeles Lakers, to me, resonates with the idea that there may still be something in there for him that shows you that he is willing to make the sacrifices to ultimately be that level of great that is commanded of him, or maybe he's demanding of himself. And then I'll say this with Victor Wembanyama. When it comes to him, there hasn't been a situation or circumstance that he has not made the adjustments to. And to your point, Shaw, which is why it's so hella scary, has still managed to show a level of dominance, given a lot of the iterations that has been kind of passed under what we are seeing from the San Antonio Spurs. You couple that along with what's happened with Greg Popovich, the movement that's going back and forth on the back end of things and the restructuring of the roster. And yet you still find Victor Wembanyama is putting up impressive numbers. It's just a question of, does it translate to catapulting the San Antonio Spurs into that conversation? I will say that if another year or two passes, they will add up. And so when you've got two of these guys basically taking two very different approaches in making their game evolve the way that it does, it to me translates that they eventually are going to be MVP candidates, no question. It's just a matter of when we are going to start putting them in that conversation with whatever the standard is for that year.
Right. And the standard for that year, I think, is a great place to pick that up. Luka this upcoming season has a lot riding on it, the MVP conversation. The Lakers can be, 3-4 seed maybe in the West. Well, I think a lot of people would not put them that high up. I don't really know his raw numbers are going to go that much exponentially more than we've seen even in his height in Dallas. I don't think that's what it's going to be about. He's not going to all of a sudden go from what that year he averaged 34, 35 games. He's going to average 38. I don't think that's going to be the case. But I think it's a matter of do we see a better level of defense? And do the Lakers, win as a result of him being able to stay on the floor more often? Is he healthier throughout the course of the regular season as a result of this new, skinnier version of himself? Those are the narrative aspects that we're going to see come into play, because I don't think statistically we're going to see that much more of a push from him, especially when it comes to the offensive side of the basketball. But, does he even try harder on defense, where could also lead into the narrative some, where Wembanyama has so much going for him is because he does play on both sides of the basketball. He could be the defensive player of the year and potential MVP candidate while averaging gaudy numbers, 27, 12, and 3.5, 4 blocks with 4 assists a game on great percentages. That's nothing to sneeze at, especially when you come to the defensive side of what he's potentially going to be doing on that as well. But these two guys just have so much talent. And I think they're both going to have narrative plays going alongside for them. Even though I think Wemby might be challenged some maybe with the addition of a Dylan Harper, if he turns out to be as good as he really is, not to mention Stephon Castle, and then obviously Fox there as well too. Will it say, hell, does he have too much help? A la Jason Tatum, as Tatum's star kind of drop out of the MVP conversation because the Celtics became just too good based on all the other players that they added to the roster. But overall, these two guys seem like they have by far and away the longest runway within the shortest amount of time to capture the narrative and so it's potentially hoist an MVP trophy.
I'm gonna throw something here real quick because I know that the next step would be for us to talk about that third party, right? The one who we think is going to crash the party a little bit over the next few years. There's two things that I think people should pay attention to when we're talking about what can catapult a guy like Luka Doncic and what may catapult a guy like Victor Wembanyama. For Luka Doncic, I want people to pay attention to the clutch gene, right? Clutch player of the year candidacy. Right now, you can make the argument that Luka Doncic is probably one of the top 3 players, and really one of the top players who's not in that conversation because of the way that the metrics are skewed. But if you're talking about a player who is going to have numerous opportunities in order for us to show just how great he can be in the fourth quarter or more, that would be Luka Doncic, right? Like, this is a great chance for him to come into this situation because we know that even with the way that the Lakers are structured, they're not blowing teams out of the water. They're going to be within games. So this version of Luka, whether it's from a defensive perspective or an offensive perspective, if the Lakers are going to be formidable in those closely contested games, the equalizer is knowing that you got a guy who's got that killer instinct, ice in his veins, and has the opportunity to do that on a night in, night out basis on primetime television. That could be one way that he gets catapulted very quickly into those MVP conversations, no doubt, right?
Let me interact only because I think it's important to. We've talked about Luka almost like this singular heliocentric entity on the Lakers. Is there any way on God's green earth that Luka can capture an MVP with LeBron still on the roster? Imagine so that would be like within the next year or two. While we're saying this is a 3 to 5 year window, even with the narrative going into this year with skinny Luka coming into play, could it actually happen with LeBron on the roster? That's the caveat to it. I think that I haven't quite sunk my teeth into fully.
I will say this. If LeBron hands the reins over. And when I say that in its form of how Dwayne Wade did that with LeBron James. You see what I'm saying? Like, this is actually a great opportunity, right? This year alone, with that level of greatness, for you to, quote unquote, on a night in, night out basis, outshine the standard of the NBA and say that it's okay, LeBron, you can pass the baton to Luka now, and he goes and runs with it, and we see that as it forms. It's very poetic, and it's the kind of story that manifests itself into us moving a guy right into that MVP conversation. If only for a couple of months, he gets thrown right in there because he's taking it and he's running with it. And I think that's what we want to see. We want to actually see the story being written as it's happening. You know what I'm saying? And right. That would be great. I'm with you, Shaw. I'm a little bit like, whoo, but I'm saying that for that to be actually manifested true, these are those components by which Luka Doncic can help elevate that conversation, so to speak. Because unless the Lakers are just going to be that dominant and he's just scoring all those kind of points and everything like that, all of the things that you're talking about are the things that we're saying that Luka has to be better at. All of that is going to matter in the fourth quarter because typically that's when LeBron has to step up and do those things. But if Luka is the person doing that, if Luka is the one who is – now, I'm not saying he's got to be taking the best offensive player and defending him or anything like that. But what I'm saying is that in those critical moments when they are gunning for him and they know it, and he figures out a way to stop that, you know what I'm saying, that play. He figures out a way to, force that ball out of that guy's hands. Now we're talking about, he's taking a step. We did that with Steph Curry, and I think you can do the same thing with Luka Doncic as well, too. And one last thing I was going to say about this, Shaw. Luka Doncic doesn't have to be top 10, maybe not even top 15 as far as defensive metrics go among guards in the Western Conference. But he can't be 23rd, 24th, 25th. He has got to at least be with top 20. He's got to show some level of improvement that also helps accentuate the offensive capabilities that we know that he's capable of bringing to the table. He shows those type of improvements, and the Lakers are that relevant or in the conversation, and we won't deny him of his rightful place of being in that MVP conversation, and won't drop him out so easily because of it either.
Well, the one thing I will close with on these top two here is LeBron wanted AD to be that guy. I don't know that LeBron wants Luka to be that guy because the situation is switched. And LeBron, for all intents and purposes, by reports, LeBron hasn't said it himself, but feels like the Lakers are kind of forcing him out. And so I'd be interested to see how he does play this, especially this year. If he does finish the season in the purple and gold, how does he acquiesce, if you will, to the Batman that Luka is obviously trying to be here as they try to kind of usher LeBron's era out of LA while still being competitive with the two of them kind of in play. So that's where it would give me a little bit of pause, where I think Wemby might have a slightly better chance to get there before Luka does, especially if Luka and LeBron are playing together for another even 1 or 2 seasons.
Absolutely. My last take, Shaw, regarding Victor Wembanyama, he just needs to continue to keep posting up these impressive numbers. He right now is doing the kind of things that are kind of forcing the analytic guys to scramble around and keep coming up with more metrics and more numbers, right? And he continues to keep doing that, he's going to forever be in this kind of conversation. I think at the end of it, what it just translates to is, will the San Antonio Spurs be relevant because of those numbers that he is doing? But there's no question. He doesn't have to be the clutch guy. The Spurs can build around all of that, but from quarters 1 to 3, he can continue to exude the level of dominance. And if the Spurs are that good defensively in those fourth quarters, if the Spurs are that good offensively in those fourth quarters, there's no question Victor Wembanyama is going to have his hand, he's going to have his imprints all over that, which will further just put him in that conversation each and every single time. His level of dominance, to me, that what we see doesn't just happen. It happens before them cats even pull up in the bus. You know what I'm saying? That's what's going on right now with Victor Wembanyama. And I was someone who was very skeptical about that just because I just didn't see where all of that was kind of coming into play. But these have now been 2 years where we're seeing it. And I'm saying, like, he can just continue to keep doing that, and he is going to be completely fine. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, strong contenders. Dudes that were like, they're flexing, they're in the gym. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? They're about to max out. They're about to get some PRs in there. But are their PRs good enough to outlift the first two guys we just finished talking about? You don't want to miss it here on The Baseline. We are back, Callie, Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast. And our conversation is MVP frontrunners in the next 3 to 5 years. Cats that we talking about saying, can they hoist their first MVP trophy? You know what I'm saying? All they got to do is leapfrog Jokic and SGA. But that's light work. That's light work. It's the other dudes that we be talking about saying you got to get, you know what I'm saying, got to get around that bend. You got to F1 them. You know what I'm saying? So we just finished talking about Victor Wembanyama, and we just finished talking about Luka Doncic, right? Like, they're obviously one of the strongest candidates. And I'd be remiss in saying, what happens if Joel Embiid gets healthy again? And, will there ever be an opportunity for Kevin Durant? Forget all of that, man. Let's talk about guys who really don't get that kind of love or that kind of conversation. If they do, it's probably like for 1 or 2 weeks, and then something happens, and they suddenly just get, you know what I'm saying, X'd out of the conversation so quickly, so fast. So who are we seeing as our strongest candidates that are right behind Doncic and Wembanyama?
So I'm going to throw out probably 3 names, and I'd say probably in the next 2 to 3 years is their, not necessarily their window, but maybe the height of where they'll have that opportunity. And that's Anthony Edwards. Again, we talk about narrative, we talk about likability, the skill set, and then his team being good. Minnesota made another unprecedented run in the playoffs in the Western Conference. And I think the Timberwolves and he are just going to continue to rise and get better, as will his star and the narrative that will surround him when it comes to the media. The other two guys, slightly lower key in terms of their overall personalities, but killers when they're on the court, and also have a great opportunity to have success from their team side because they're in the Eastern Conference, and that's Jalen Brunson and Donovan Mitchell. Brunson may be the longest of the shots simply because obviously a new coach in the situation here, so we don't know exactly what Woodson's going to be able to do with him this year and years subsequent to this. But the Knicks are clearly one of the class teams in the Eastern Conference, and that gives them also a very, very strong narrative, big market behind them. And then if I switch things over to Donovan Mitchell, the only question, not the only question, but one of the big questions I have with Mitchell, is he the most important player on this team, right? We talk a lot about Evan Mobley, which is a guy we can maybe talk about in another segment, but Mitchell has best player on the floor capability. And we've seen him do that in multiple stretches through the course of his career, but just not in a sustainable way to get team success that gets into a conference finals and beyond. But I think those three guys have a lot going for them. Obviously, three guards, maybe Edwards more of a wing if you're thinking about it from that lens, but guys who have a lot of capability, talent, and have the leadership roles on their rosters to propel them to the MVP conversation.
I got to tell you the irony of you bringing up these three players, Shaw, because it just didn't dawn on me until you just started talking. You know what I'm saying? Until you started articulating your points regarding all three of them. So let me kind of speak to my, what the madness going on in my head about these three guys, right? I find it crazy that we are now talking about Anthony Edwards in this particular kind of light. But to have done that, right, we have to look at what led up to that. Really, his takeover of the Timberwolves from Karl-Anthony Towns. Karl-Anthony Towns now moves over to the New York Knicks. And yet we are talking about Jalen Brunson being more of an MVP candidate than Karl-Anthony Towns, which ironically, we would have been saying to ourselves, with the stature, the build, and the style of play that Karl-Anthony Towns coming out of college, being the kind of player that he's been, he should have already been in conversations to be an MVP. And I think the only time that we even kind of had an inkling of that was his second year, maybe his third year as a Minnesota Timberwolf. I mean, it's not like he doesn't have the ability to have those numbers, but I'd be hard pressed to say he's going to be able to leapfrog a guy like Jalen Brunson, right? And so I talk about that, and I now transition this to the irony of everything. Anthony Edwards probably will have the best opportunity to run with the idea of being an MVP because he no longer has Karl-Anthony Towns that he has to kind of contend with being the alpha, so to speak, to show those that level of dominance as one of the faces of basketball. However, it could very easily do him in if the Minnesota Timberwolves do not sustain the level of success that they've had over the last couple of seasons, right? So it's incumbent upon Anthony Edwards to continue to elevate his game. And I think part of that is going to be more on the defensive side of things and also showing his ability to counter when he sees his contemporaries out there countering against, the competition as well, too, and figuring out ways to still have dominant performances, right? We talk about Jalen Brunson. Jalen Brunson, his hurdle was getting past the Boston Celtics, which he managed to do. The next hurdle now is getting the New York Knicks to the NBA Finals. If he figures out a way to do that and still have the Knicks playing among one of the top teams in the Eastern, being one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference, which I don't see why that cannot be the case, regardless of what we're talking about. He very easily has the inside track to be in that conversation as an MVP person, right? For Donovan Mitchell, it's ironic for us to see that he should be MVP-like. I'm not saying he only has to beat Jalen Brunson, but he has to figure out a way for the Cavaliers to get past the teams that have impeded their ability to get to the Eastern Conference Finals and eventually the NBA Finals. Meaning, you got to hurdle either Jalen Brunson, you may have to hurdle the Boston Celtics, you know what I'm saying? But at some point, Donovan Mitchell has to figure out a way to elevate his teams in the most critical matchups that have compromised him being taken seriously as an MVP. I just find it ironic because at the end of the day, we could be easily talking about how Jason Tatum should be an MVP. You know what I'm saying? And yet 2 of the 3 people that we're saying are the strongest contenders may have to revisit this conversation of possibly going through the Boston Celtics, possibly going through a person, a caliber like a Jason Tatum, who it may never put in that conversation, may figure out a way to put in that conversation, but whatever version of the Boston Celtics is, they're going to have to use that team as a stepping stool in order to still elevate them.
Well, I hear what you're saying. I mean, I don't want to send the conversation creating, too far to the left here. I'd say Brunson's thing right now is actually getting past the Pacers. With the Celtics was just this previous year, but 2 years in a row. But remember, the MVP conversation has nothing to do with playoff success. Like, the MVP is all regular season. So what does the regular season numbers look like as those teams head into the playoffs? And that's how the MVP will ultimately decided, unless you're going to talk about it like not from that singular year, like, hey, they had X amount of success the previous year. And then what do they do like in year two after they make it to the conference finals or whatever? Like, that's a complicated way, I think, of looking at things per se. But I think, as we're looking into kind of like
I'm a complicated kind of guy, Shaw.
Well, but I'm thinking about in the next 2-ish years, Brunson and Donovan Mitchell really do have opportunities to kind of seize the Eastern Conference. And while the East has some other air quote contenders that are probably eyeing them and are probably not afraid of either one of those players and those rosters, I do think they have the strongest cases when we're talking about the narrative side of any other Eastern Conference players currently not already mentioned. And going back to the Anthony Edwards thing really quickly, I honestly think Cat learned a lot playing with Ant and learned how to acquiesce, and he realized that young dude was the present and future of the roster. So he knew he needed to be the number two, and he didn't go to New York trying to usurp Brunson in the same way. He already kind of had a year or two under his belt. Like, listen, that young guy has kind of got it. I can really make my hay being like this really great support guy. Support is, probably miscasting it and underselling it some, but basically being the number two option in a high level number two option in this offense and defense. Cat understands that from playing with Anthony Edwards, and that's why it's not going to be a problem with him playing with Brunson and Brunson trying to get MVP glory on the Knicks.
So I'm not saying that Karl-Anthony Towns will have a problem or Brunson. Well, clearly not Brunson, because that was part of the narrative.
No, I didn't say you did.
Oh, okay, good. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't I didn't want to make it seem like you were misinterpreting what I was saying. I just want to make sure I was clarifying for people to understand.
I was reiterating.
If anything,
Cat has learned a lot, and that makes his case really great as a number two guy. But make sure that Brunson understands, like, hey, he can be the guy here without any issues.
I completely agree with you. I think what I wanted to add on top of this point, Shaw, was maybe we should also, and maybe this person is going to be when we talk about dark horses, and we'll do that in a minute. But Karl-Anthony Towns should be in that kind of conversation, right? Like, he puts up some really impressive numbers at his position and what he does for the New York Knicks. Now, he is a liability at times from a defensive perspective, but that's where growth comes into play, right? So we'll see what happens, under the Mike Brown era, right, of him having an influence on what Karl-Anthony Towns can do that can help accentuate the numbers that he's not just putting up together offensively, what he can actually contribute for the Knicks defensively. And what I'm saying is that it hasn't been foregone that we didn't have situations when we were talking Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown both being MVP-like players or being in an MVP conversation. I think if the Knicks are what people are predicting for them to have the kind of season they're going to have, you can easily put the both of them in the conversations respectively, because what Karl-Anthony Towns can give you from the 4-5 position could certainly elevate him, you know what I'm saying, very quickly into that space. But also ultimately, Shaw, the Jalen Brunson factor to me is that clutch gene of Jalen Brunson being the kind of player that he's been the last few years, especially in the fourth quarter. Again, it matters. It makes a difference, unless the Knicks are just flat out blowing out teams. And I agree with you, and my bad to my peoples. I did not want to be dismissive of what the Indiana Pacers. We spent all summer in the last couple of years, and even I myself have been bigging up the Indiana Pacers. I do think, though, that especially the next couple of years, this version of what we need to see about the Pacers, I'm very hesitant on. We're not going to see a real Tyrese Haliburton for at least a season. So we'll see whether or not what version of him and what version of the Pacers he's coming into is going to look like against the likes of the Knicks and the Cavaliers. I'm just talking about under the current construction of what we currently see. because I think teams like the Celtics and the Pacers may take a step back. But if they are still in the conversation of being in playoff contention, play-in contention or whatever, I think that when we talk about MVP conversations through the regular seasons, their performances against those type of players and that caliber of team is going to make a difference on whether or not they stay in the conversation.
Well, you brought up Tatum a lot, and I think, I don't want to bring him up here. I want to slide him down to potentially another part of this conversation, but there's one more guy I do want to bring up here. And there is a sliver of a chance, I think, that Anthony Davis could get into this conversation, and that is, probably more in the next 2 to 3 years and not 3 to 5 years type of situation. But with the bet that the Dallas Mavericks have placed on him, the luck that they've also gotten in Cooper Flag, obviously bolstered by Kyrie Irving potentially coming back, AD has Wembanyama-like potential, right? Offense, defense, a guy that can, you could run both of those things.
Anthony Davis was the universal soldier, right? Yeah. And Victor Wembanyama, or Anthony Davis is a Terminator, and then Victor Wembanyama now is T2, right? Like that's,
for all intents and purposes, and AD still has all the tools to really dominate basketball. So while Dallas's success is going to be hard to kind of determine, especially for this next year, if 2 years from now, when they are fully healthy with, a pretty strong, healthy roster, I wouldn't rule it out that AD could get into the conversation. And I don't know, people are just tired of him and feel like, listen, he just doesn't have that, that killer instinct that a lot of people want from, especially an MVP caliber type guy. But I think a similar narrative could be in place as well, too, as a guy who was unceremoniously shipped from LA when he was pegged to be the future of the Lakers franchise. There's the talent is there. We just got to see if the motivation will match that, in addition to the winning that the Dallas Mavericks have here with the next couple of seasons.
One thing I want to liken to your point, Shaw, about the pathway for Anthony Davis to be in that conversation, I almost liken it to what we talk about when we say Kevin Durant and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The ability to dominate in small pockets, right? You don't need to take 25 shots to have a dominant performance. You don't need to spend excess of 35 to 37 minutes. If all you gave me was 31, 32 minutes, and yet your numbers are comparable to somebody that would need a full 37, 38, right? And those numbers can still historically measure up to what we're talking about as the current standard of the NBA. If there are only so many people who I think are capable of doing that, Anthony Davis is one of those people, Shaw. And I think that's where we kind of have to come back, to the reality of these things, that if these guys are healthy, right, can we not still have them in that conversation if what they're doing is so dominant and they don't need, to exude the, so many minutes to be able to do it? I think, to me, that's what I'm hoping to see, to what you're talking about, is that level of dominance within a short period of time.
Yeah. So, we're rooting for AD, obviously for his health, and, everybody to kind of have their best seasons that they possibly can. But I just think his talent is warranted in terms of the conversation. But we can absolutely go to break here. And then there's a couple of guys who, and one guy in particular, we've already even talked about, who is trying to be an AD light, I'd say, in terms of kind of a rising star that might have an opportunity to capture an MVP glory here in the next 5 years.
Absolutely. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Don't go anywhere. We got our dark horses coming up. We are back. Callie Warren Shaw, Baseline NBA podcast. What a conversation that we're having, man. MVP talk. You know what I'm saying? And probably it's only right that we do that, because the MVP of our podcast for so many years. I get the opportunity to share this microphone with the MVP himself. The man, the myth, the legend, my man, Mr. Warren Shaw. So we've talked about the faves. We've talked about the strong contenders. Now we get to talk about dark horses. And I like where you were going, Shaw, just before we hit our break, because you were like, there was one guy. It's hard to say whether or not we should just catapult him in strong contenders, but we'd be remiss if we're not saying, yo, this guy's got to be in this conversation basically now moving forward. And I know who you're talking about, but I'm a lay it out. Here's your opportunity, Shaw. Grace us with the knowledge.
Well, that's so interesting because I hope we're talking about the same person, because I said a guy who is kind of AD light, and we've already kind of alluded to him, right? And it would be Evan Mobley, I think, at this stage, because he is somebody who has the offensive capability, defensive capability, just finally kind of showed that level of prowess, made an All-NBA team this year, but then also has another All-NBA guy on his roster, and Donovan Mitchell, who we put as a strong candidate. But Mobley, by many people's account, is the most important Cavalier because of the proverbial ceiling and the defense that he's able to play. Obviously, the switchability as well, too. He's somebody that, again, 3 to 5 years from now, is he knocking on the door of capturing MVP votes, right? Or does he more kind of have like a Chris Bosh career where very good, Hall of Fame-like, but never dominant in the way that you feel like, okay, he was really the main cog of the reason for a team winning, so to speak. But I think Mobley has all the talent in the world, but it'll be really, really interesting to see how he and Mitchell pair alongside each other, or do they cancel each other out in terms of the Cavaliers having ultimate success, and for either one of those guys making a strong MVP candidacy.
I like where you're going with Evan Mobley, Shaw, because you know me, I was a very staunch critic of Evan Mobley, and not because I didn't see the potential in what you've been talking about and what you've been laying out for the longest time. I've often felt like it's just something in how he's played the game of basketball. You know, there's some guys, and we did this in the early years with Anthony Davis. There's some guys that are just so naturally talented in the way that they play the game that they just make it look effortless. They make it look like they just don't put in a lot of work to do what just naturally comes good to them, right? Like God just touched them with, you know what I'm saying? Say, hey, go out there and just, ball out. You know what I'm saying? Don't even exert a level of sweat in how you go about doing it, young son. That's what we saw with Evan Mobley. And now we're actually seeing a level of hunger in him. We're seeing a level of aggressiveness in him. And I think it's refreshing to see that in a way. Don't know whether or not that's been influenced since Donovan Mitchell has come onto this team. But maybe the influence of Donovan Mitchell and what he sees in Evan Mobley is now kind of allowing Mobley for him to spread his wings, for him to show more enthusiasm in how he can ultimately dominate that position, be among one of the top 3 players at his position in the NBA. So I agree with you, Shaw, in that sense. To me, does it catapult him ahead of the person that I might be thinking of? And it's not AD light, but it's damn sure scary to that. And how about Paolo Banchero for the Orlando Magic? Now, if the Orlando Magic, Shaw, become one of the top 3-4 teams, which they could very easily be in the next few years, right? What we're seeing from Banchero, to me, can very much reflect something similar to those numbers that we talk about with Carmelo Anthony. And not so much the fact that he's playing with such a marginalized team. He actually has dominant numbers while still playing with guys that can get eventually better, right? Collectively. And it all has started by them being great defensively. Banchero, by all accounts, has the measurements to literally score as many points as the SGAs, the Donovan Mitchells, you know what I'm saying, as the Victor Wembanyamas. But those other numbers, those other intangibles, he has so much opportunity and room. And if they decide to go the way of a point forward style of basketball, Banchero clearly has a skill set that allows him to be able to run it as such. And since there's a lot of question marks with the Orlando Magic and their backcourt situation, there's no doubt he can elevate himself to a LeBron-like level for the Orlando Magic and do things that are very reminiscent of what we remind ourselves when we saw LeBron doing what he was doing with the Cleveland Cavaliers. There is an opportunity there that I think a lot of people have to pay attention to, which can easily put Banchero as a dark horse favorite of MVP. And I know we're going to talk about another person as well, too. You may be talking about one kid that we're talking about in Detroit, but I'm just saying that, like, given the talent measurements between those teams, Banchero has a lot more to work with to make better than what Cade has, because you can clearly tell that team can collectively get better. And Cade does not have to be at the top, but he can certainly utilize that to put himself in that position.
Yeah, I'm not going to sneeze at the Banchero pick here at all.
Has he not been scary over the like from the second half of the year? And man, I felt so bad when he fell to that injury the early part of last season.
Sure.
But man, when he came on and essentially what he showed us in the playoffs against the Boston Celtics, maybe it's okay that Tatum and Brown are taking quote unquote a like.
Yeah, I mean, but he still has a long way to go in terms of handle,
yes.
Right. I think there's some of the decision making you can say maybe it's because there wasn't the appropriate roster behind him, so he's taking a lot of shots at the end of a shot clock, and not getting the most efficient looks possible, and doesn't have anybody really setting him up. They've improved all of those things around him now, but I still think his handle needs to get tighter, and does his overall, I think, focus on the defense side of the basketball. But there's no doubt that this is a talented individual who is still scratching the surface of what he can ultimately become. And if you're saying, I think it's more in the latter part of the 3 to 5 year timeline that we're talking about, but definitely within this conversation and real possibility, especially
Mobley's close
Orlando is making in terms of trying to be a better team in the Eastern Conference. Like, they're going for it. Like, this isn't some, we think we're all right, and maybe we'll throw a couple of chips in. Like, no, they're hands down like, hey, we got our money up. We're paying our guys. We're bringing in, star level talent, even all-star level talent to some degree, I think, in Desmond Bane. And they feel like they have an opportunity. So they know Banchero and Wagner and Bane are the future of this roster. And let's see if Banchero has an opportunity to get into the MVP conversation.
Final thought, Shaw. Does it surprise you that we don't have Ja Morant in that conversation? Does it surprise you that we wouldn't put Devin Booker in that conversation? I'm not saying that I would be surprised by it. I know that some people may be sitting here saying to themselves, like, well, how can we not throw them in there about possibly being in a position to do that? Or do they think that we think that we've soured on the idea that there's that potential for them to be able to do that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is narrative. And, Ja has a long road to climb before I think we're going to be thinking about him in this space. And while I think the Grizzlies still have an opportunity to be a good team and even heard from in the Western Conference, I'm just not quite sure that the narrative is going to be in his favor in a way to get him into this conversation, to really feel like, hey, he has a real opportunity at the MVP. Not that he won't be an all-star or something like that, even all-NBA. But I just don't see that. And I think Phoenix has just taken too far of a step back in terms of the roster development for Booker to even sniff this conversation. Booker is going to be a Hall of Famer himself. He seems to want to be a Phoenix Sun lifer for whatever reason. God bless him for the loyalty to that. But that loyalty is not going to reward him in terms of being an MVP candidate anytime soon. So that's why I don't have any issue leaving these two guys out, despite the talent level that they clearly display on a day-to-day basis on the basketball court.
Yeah, I think this is all compelling stuff, right? And I know that there are going to be plenty of people that I'm sure people want to make sure that, hey, we should give acknowledgement to. So we want to hear from you. We want to know what your perspective and thoughts are. Are there people that should be on that list that we should obviously consider? And I would challenge everyone to say this. Don't just assume to say, hey, nah, your guy's list is trash or whatever the case may be. That wasn't what we're trying to do here. I think what we're trying to do is really introduce people to some names that only aren't in the forefront of just the standard status quo mind, but more so the collective mind of why we should be considering them. So not just give us the name, but hey, give us perspective. Give us reasons why we should consider, quote unquote, a Devin Booker, a Tyrese Maxey, a Pascal Siakam, a Scotty Barnes. What of that should us be saying, hey, these guys should be in the conversation within the next 3 to 5 years to be discussed as possible MVP candidates? And where's the pathway go for that? I think that would make some great conversations. And more importantly, Shaw, what that does, it starts opening up a platform to put their names in there for us to discuss, rather than kind of sweeping it under or waiting until after they have like this quote unquote blitz of a mini campaign to be in that conversation. Let's start up the conversation now. Let's get the warm-ups, the pre-warm-ups going right now about why we want to start considering those additional dudes. Because as far as I'm concerned, Shaw, I think it's awesome that we can have 15 people in the conversation being MVP. You want to know why? That's because everybody's eating. Everybody is thriving. Everybody is balling. And when everybody is balling, everybody is watching the NBA.
Yeah, so I'm going to close with some really quick hitters. And I mean really quick. Cade has an opportunity in Detroit. I think maybe just as good as Paolo. different roster construction and different play and different talent set that they possess. But I think Cade can be in that conversation. Then way out, and I mean super dark horses, I think are Jason Tatum and Tyrese Haliburton. And they're probably 2 to 3 years away. But if they come back from these, devastating Achilles injuries, lead their teams to great regular seasons and prominent 1 or 2 seeds in the conferences a couple of years from now, they'll have some narrative, I think, on both on their sides. And it's both are guys that media seems to like. Tyrese maybe a little less than Tatum. Tatum, I think, has some shine, and then, some of the shine wore off. But they will have redemption stories that I think people could get behind if they come back and return to form and lead their teams to a level of success. And then I will say, kind of in closing as well, maybe there's an opportunity in the 4 to 5 year range that Cooper Flagg is as good as everybody says he is. Does he sniff this opportunity? But the one guy who I know nobody is going to agree with, and I mean nobody, is Zion Williamson. And Zion will never be an MVP candidate with the New Orleans Pelicans. That will never, ever happen. But if he's moved, does it spark a Luka Doncic-like transformation? Oh, I can't believe they moved me. You know what? Now's the year. I'm going to get in shape. I'm going to show you. And I don't know. I think the talent level is clearly there. The want and desire is clearly not there. But will those two things ever marry together to allow Zion to live to the potential that we all know he has? I just know it cannot be in New Orleans. So if Joe D decides to trade him at some point, look for Zion's redemption season to be the one where he at least sniffs the MVP conversation, potentially.
I think I'm going to go watch a Lauren concert now.
I'm trying to leave with optimism.
I want to know. I want to find Zion too. You know what I'm saying? You know what? Maybe Lauren needs to serenade our boy. You know what I'm saying? Give him some inspiration. Give him some hope. You know what I'm saying? Give him a little bit of inspiration. Give him some hope. You know?
Well, Jody, trade Zion so we can at least see if there's an opportunity to spark something different in that young man's mentality, because the talent is clearly there.
Oh my God. Awesome show this week, Shaw. A lot of good stuff, man. And again, we want to hear from y'all, man. Hit us up, man. Get on the thread, get on the channel. Give us your perspective of possible candidates you'd like for us to say are MVP worthy over the next few years, and lay it out for us. Give us a perspective of why you would think that's the case, man. As always, man, we appreciate each and every single one of you. You know what I'm saying? Get ready, man. Get excited, man. We got a lot of stuff happening, man. Get ready to roll out some really good content, man, as we get closer to the NBA season. Oh, and Shaw, wanted to give a quick shout outs to one of our former guests and obviously a colleague, contemporary in the media space, Taylor Rooks, for getting hitched. You know what I'm saying?
Hello.
Shout outs to our girl, man. And nothing, is nothing better than, continuing to pursue your happiness, not just in your professional life, but in your personal life as well, too. Saw the pics on Insta, man. I just want to give a shout out, man. She was such a great person to have on our show some time ago, man, when she was with Bleacher Report, man. And I'm always happy to see our people out there doing their thing on and off the microphone, man. So shout outs to her, man. I just wanted to make sure that I threw that plug in there.
Yeah, well, I mean, while we're giving shout outs, I think keeping it a little bit more local, but shout out to our guy, Robin Marks, out there doing his thing at VidFest, is a speaker out at that conference, and, just really, really grinding in terms of his overall content. Make sure you follow him, believe in fantasy.
Yeah, and fantasy basketball,
So
it's happening.
Got to bring it back around too. And then his show also on that Team Media Group, Land the Talk will be coming back here in the latter part of fall. Early winter time. So, staying true to that. But shout out to Robin, man, doing really great things here for 19 Media Group, brother. So we're on the rise, man. We're on the rise. Like to see people thrive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Once again, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us this week for The Baseline. Callie, Warren, Shaw. We appreciate you guys. We do. And we'll catch up with you next time.